Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Amanda McKee. I'm the Director for Knowledge and Learning with the NDC Partnership Support Unit, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our session on climate finance units as part of our Raising Ambition Through Partnership webinar series. We're going to focus on the potential to increase access to climate finance, one of the key strategic priorities we've heard from our developing country members. Before we get started, I want to go over just a few housekeeping notes. First of all, we're very pleased to offer interpretation into Spanish and French for this session. So if you'd like to listen to the webinar in one of those languages, please click on within your Zoom window the globe icon, the interpretation or language icon, to access the interpretation settings. Once you click on that, you'll see options for the available options, and you can select your preferred option from that list. Please also note that there's an option to mute the original audio. If you're having difficulty hearing, you can always click to mute the original audio and you'll only hear the interpretation or the interpreter's voices. We also encourage you to use the chat function throughout the session to share comments, resources, engage with other participants. We would also encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat function so we know who's on the webinar with us today. And if you have specific questions for our speakers, you can put those into the Q&A function, and we'll take those later on during today's session. We will be sharing all materials with registered participants afterwards, including the PowerPoint and any resources that are shared during the webinar, including through the chat. We will also be publishing the recording of today's webinar on our YouTube channel. I also wanted to note we have a couple of additional webinars taking place later this month. In case you're interested in attending those, we have one focusing on just transition and integrating that within the new NDCs. And then we have a technical session that will look at fossil fuel phase out. And this is part of an ongoing conversation we're having with the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. And we'll put the links to those in the chat function. So briefly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the NDC partnership, we are a global coalition that brings together 240 members, including 130 developed and developing countries and more than 100 institutions. And we work together to create and deliver on ambitious climate action that helps achieve the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Our developing country members communicate their priority needs to the partnership, and based on these, we deliver a coordinated package of technical and financial support. And what we've seen in our engagement in about 100 developing countries is finance is the most common topic that countries are coming forward to the partnership looking for support. To date, we've supported 85 countries, benefiting from support from 170 partners on specific finance topics related to building capacity, strengthening enabling environments, developing investment plans, matching projects and programs, and much more. Based on our learning from that process, we recently developed a climate investment planning and mobilization framework jointly with the GCF. And a lot of that is guiding the work that we're supporting countries on going forward. The other thing I wanted to flag is that since last June, we're extremely proud to be hosting the Secretariat and the Knowledge Center of the Task Force for Access to Climate Finance, which is a global initiative to improve access to climate finance for climate vulnerable developing countries, benefiting from the co-chair womanship by the UK and Rwanda. And through that task force, members are really looking to identify and pilot new approaches to enhance access to finance at country and system level. And today's webinar is really an extension of that process. We're going to focus in on a specific aspect of the investment planning process that we've been exploring with the task force, specifically the importance of climate finance units to improve the access, management, and impact of climate finance flows and help to ensure its alignment with national goals. Accessing and mobilizing climate finance at scale is a challenge, and it really requires a holistic approach that's tailored to each country's individual priorities and needs. And what we've seen is several countries across the partnership both have interest, but also have valuable experience to share in establishing and implementing these climate finance units. We published a brief on this topic that we're going to talk about today, and that highlights a lot of the learning that we've gathered through the partnership. And some of the things that we've seen is that climate finance units facilitate key functions for effective climate action, really core to the principles of the NDC partnership. And this includes supporting multi-stakeholder engagement and improving coordination across government and with partners and financiers. It includes enhanced integration of climate into national planning and alignment with development or between development and climate change, enhanced efficiency, responsiveness, and the impact of projects and programs. And these climate finance units are also critical to building up in-country capacity to lead these processes. So I want to first thank our many partners and countries who provided input into this work, and then give a special thanks to representatives from Uganda, Bangladesh, the UK, Belgium, and the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action that are here with us today to share some of their experiences. And also thank you to Climate Analytics, who supported in the development of this policy brief. So as countries come forward over the next months with more ambitious NDCs, we know that we need to continue to find better ways to increase access to finance for climate action in order for them to bring those NDCs to life. And so I'm really looking forward to today's discussion to hear from our distinguished guests and from participants, but also looking forward to continuing to work through the partnership and through the task force to access or to advance access to climate finance. With that, I'm very pleased to hand it over to my colleague, Usman Khan, who's going to start today's webinar by presenting some of the key insights coming out of the policy brief that I mentioned. Thank you. And Usman, over to you.
Thanks very much, Amanda, and welcome to all on the call. It's very nice to have you with us. I'll be providing a brief overview of our recently published policy brief before we head into our panel discussion. So to just build off the remarks made, it's clear that countries need finance to implement the variety of climate-related plans they have as they shift from development to implementation. We know that the scale of finance that's needed is going to be significant. An estimate suggests that emerging markets and developing countries will need annual investment of $2.4 trillion by 2030 to meet climate goals. To give you a sense of the financing gap, that's currently 4 times what's invested. We do expect that the amount of climate finance will increase, but beyond increasing scale, we have to ensure that there's greater ease and access to this finance. And so robust institutional frameworks that accelerate the access and management of climate finance are going to be key. In the absence of such mechanisms, countries face the risk of inefficient financial flows, duplicative efforts, and misalignment with national climate and development goals. Climate finance units, which I'll refer to as CFUs going forward, can offer an institutional framework whereby countries are better positioned to identify, prioritize, and develop investment-ready projects to attract larger volumes of climate finance. The policy brief that we've developed draws on extensive literature and consultations with representatives from CFUs, development partners, climate finance initiatives, and the private sector. And the brief highlights the importance of setting up CFUs for enhanced climate action, outlining best practices and success stories. And so, what are the key rationale for establishing CFUs? We find that they enable countries to centralize efforts to access, coordinate, and manage climate finance. We note that CFUs can enhance national financial and budgetary processes And this is done by supporting the development of climate-aligned budgets. They can promote a unified approach to resource mobilization by strengthening interministerial and cross-sectoral coordination. And on the point of resource mobilization, we know that finance comes from a range of sources, and accessing these streams of finance and appropriately channeling them is going to require specialized capacity. A CFU can address this by acting as a dedicated focal point for climate finance. Lastly, bringing together what I've already highlighted, CFUs can better navigate the complexity of climate finance, which can often be characterized as slow, fragmented, and bureaucratic in nature. There are several common functions performed by CFUs. Now, these are going to vary depending on national contexts, but generally speaking, they look to do the following. Firstly, they mobilize and coordinate climate finance. This could be considered their primary function. We know that CFUs are often involved in developing and implementing climate finance strategies, and as focal points for finance, they can strengthen whole of government and whole of society approaches, helping simplify and coordinate interactions between government and other actors. And this unique positioning allows them to integrate climate ambition into national development processes, which ensures that climate projects are both adequately funded and aligned with national development goals. On this point of alignment with national development goals, CFUs can contribute to an environment in which climate resilience and low carbon development become integral to economic planning. This mainstreaming of climate considerations can be achieved in a number of ways. For example, by embedding climate objectives within fiscal policy, within taxation systems, and within national budgeting processes. Ultimately, this can result in improved resourcing and political support for transformational climate action. Related to the first point on mobilizing finance, CFUs often play a crucial role in supporting the development of projects and proposals. And they often do this by acting as intermediaries between national government and climate finance providers. Next, despite only emerging relatively recently, CFUs are increasingly seen as being crucial in the mainstreaming of gender equality and social inclusion in climate finance activities. We're well aware that climate change disproportionately impacts vulnerable populations, including women, local communities, and indigenous people. And CFUs play a role here by promoting inclusivity and by integrating these considerations into relevant strategies and plans. Lastly, CFUs perform a vital function in supporting capacity building and institutional strengthening. Training and technical support can be provided to government, both at national and subnational levels, to civil society, and to private sector actors, to more effectively engage with climate finance mechanisms. And this strengthens the overall climate finance ecosystem and improves the ability of stakeholders to develop, implement, and evaluate climate projects. That's not all. Looking ahead, CFUs are expected to take on expanded roles as countries strive to meet more ambitious climate commitments and mobilize private sector capital at scale. There's also a rising demand for programmatic approaches to meet climate goals. And here I'd like to draw attention to the Climate Investment Planning and Immobilization Framework, which was noted at the top of the call. This is co-developed by the partnership in the GCF. The framework's a non-prescriptive guide that provides a common reference point and language for countries and climate finance providers to navigate the steps involved in moving from planning to implementation. And CFUs, as coordinating bodies for climate investment and mobilization, can use this framework as a blueprint to strengthen upstream processes, by which I mean enabling environments, prioritization of investments and financing strategies, and downstream processes, by which I mean mobilization of finance and investments. At the top of the presentation, I'd noted that countries are going to require annual investment of $2.4 trillion by 2030. Now, around $1 trillion of these funds is going to need to come from international sources of finance. And CFUs, in their role as mobilizers of finance, often collaborate with development partners to get support for their own efforts. Development partners play an important role throughout the cycle of CFU development. I've highlighted a couple of examples on the right-hand side which speak to this. From the outset, CFUs tend to require early stage financial and operational support. This tends to form the bulk of upfront costs, and development partners can play a role. As a CFU is operationalized, it's going to need to be well-staffed and capacitated. Development partners can support this by embedding experts, by providing training programs to staff, and by facilitating knowledge exchanges between CFUs to bolster capacity. This can be further coupled with technical assistance, which supports the development of relevant strategies and plans, which builds monitoring and reporting systems, and which manages relationships across ministries and with climate finance providers. Up to this point, I've tried to outline how establishing CFUs can provide significant opportunities to strengthen a country's climate finance ecosystem. But I should also note that these opportunities come with their share of challenges. And these challenges are going to require strategic management to ensure that a CFU's mandate is effectively executed in the long term. There are a couple of factors that should be considered. Firstly, countries may face the challenge of having multifaceted and conflicting mandates, whereby multiple government institutions have responsibilities for various climate action interventions. I can give you an illustration here. A common example we've seen is where focal points for multilateral climate funds, be it the Adaptation Fund, the GEF, or the GCF, they can be housed in different entities than the one responsible for climate finance coordination. This runs the risk of potential duplication of resources and efforts. And so with this in mind, the scope and the mandate of a CFU should be clearly and carefully defined to avoid such a challenge. Next, securing political backing is crucial. Integrating CFU's international governance structures is one approach to achieve this. We found that CFUs that have a mandate that's either derived from or that reports directly to top-level decision makers are more likely to receive the attention, support, and resourcing necessary to effectively realize their objectives and functions. Now, this could take the form of a CFU being integrated within a Ministry of Finance, which is often the case, but it could equally be being embedded under a president's or a prime minister's office, or even being a standalone entity. Ultimately, this is going to be informed by national circumstances. In addition to getting support from the prevailing administration, CFU should also look to strengthen institutional capacities to withstand political changes. And this can be done, for example, by establishing transparent governance frameworks, which clarify operational processes and can support the CFU's institutionalization. A lack of technical capacity is another factor that can hinder effectiveness. Here, I speak to inadequate staffing or cases in which existing teams potentially lack the specific or technical expertise to navigate climate or finance matters. Now, staffing gaps are often addressed by bringing in external advisors, but this may not be sustainable in the long term. One way to address this is by embedding individuals from other sectoral ministries with the technical expertise into the CFU. And if this is done as an early stage, be it either as a staff or secondee, there's a good chance this will enhance legitimacy within key stakeholder groups. This can also lead to better staff retention and minimize loss of institutional capacity. Lastly, financial sustainability is a key concern for CFUs, as many rely on short-term external funding during their initial phases. Transition plans hold potential for enhancing financial sustainability by providing forward-looking information on how a CFU will move away from initial grants and donor support. And then if a CFU wants to go beyond governmental budgetary support, they can explore other cost recovery models to diversify funding sources. This can include opportunities from the private sector and innovative financing instruments. So as I draw this presentation to a close, I'm hoping that there are people in the audience that have an active interest in designing, establishing, or operationalizing climate finance units. As part of the policy brief, we've developed a step-by-step guide, as shown on the slide, which summarizes the general phases and steps involved in doing this. This was guided by the journeys of the various CFUs that were studied as part of the brief. What's important to note is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to establishing CFUs. Countries are going to have to consider their circumstances, whether it's their climate context or governance systems, when tailoring their mandate and institutional arrangements. For more detail, I'd invite you to have a look at our policy brief. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I hope that I was able to provide some insights, and I'll pass over to my colleague, Adrian, who will facilitate the panel discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Usman, for this insightful presentation. My name is Adrian Flores, a Climate Finance Associate at the NDC Partnership Support Unit Finance Hub, and I'm delighted to be moderating the panel today. Welcome again to this session. Today we will discuss how climate finance units and other type of policy arrangements, such as climate finance boards, can work as innovative mechanisms for interinstitutional coordination, but also a stakeholder engagement and coordination. And the idea is to gather insights from countries that have worked on climate finance units, but also with insights from partners that are supporting this work. And the idea will be to discuss successes, challenges, and the way forward. Today's panel has a very straightforward mechanics or structure. We will have 3 rounds of questions. Each panelist will be asked 1 question in each of the rounds. This will be a 45-50 minute panel, after which we will have a Q&A session. So if you have questions, follow-ups on what the panelists are presenting, please feel free to type them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Just I wanted to note that I'll be switching between Spanish and English to accommodate to the speakers' language preferences. So when the time comes, feel free to change between the channel interpretation channel. Today, we're fortunate to have a distinguished group of experts with us today, both from the development cooperation, from country representatives, but also from the private sector. And each panelist brings unique insights and experiences from their respective roles, whether it's leading the climate finance unit or a climate finance board, supporting their development, but also engaging with them to mobilize climate finance. So let me introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Claudia Ramirez. Claudia is NDC Compliance Specialist at the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of El Salvador. She has been instrumental in the development of the Climate Finance Board in El Salvador, but also in the working around the update and implementation of the NDC. We also have Leroy Martinez. He's acting director of the Climate Finance Unit of the Ministry of Economic Development in Belize. Leroy has served as also as the GCF focal point since 2017. and has played a key role in establishing Belize Climate Finance Unit. Next, we have Monica Altamirano. She's a consultant specializing in regenerative finance and systems thinking, and a Network Nature EU consortium partner. Monica is board member of CAE, which is a commercial agro-industry group managed by Putney Capital Management. And finally, we have Marco Butazzoni. Marco is senior specialist at the Fiscal Management Division at the Inter-American Development Bank. Previously, Marco was part of the Climate Change Division, and he's an expert in climate finance, climate and fiscal policy development, climate finance, and carbon markets. So let's get started with the questions. This first round of questions, panelists kindly ask you to stick to the 5 minutes that we have for each of your interventions. And first, I would like to hear from Belize, from Leroy Martinez. Leroy, what were the main factors that drove your country's decision to establish a climate finance unit? How has it been structured? And what factors influenced its placement within the government, in this case, the Ministry of Finance? And what lessons can you share from this experience? Over to you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Adrian, and to the organizers. Thank you very much for the invitation. Just a bit apologies. I was working on general elections last night, so I'm a bit tired since the counting finished a few hours ago. But it's an important event, so I made sure to be here. Well, first of all, Belize is a very small country. We're located in Central America, but due to our size and both in country size and economy and the culture, we also have a close link to the Caribbean region as well. When it comes to the key drivers that made government to establish the climate finance unit, first of all, Belize is very vulnerable to climate change impacts such as drought and hurricanes and storms, sea level rise, and we were a country that had a high debt in 2018, 2019. The country was experiencing high debt. That we had 3 quarters that we were in recession. We were almost in depression. Majority of the funding that was coming to Belize was through loans that were at very high interest rates, 8, 9, 10%. And so this caused a lot of problems to the government. And we had minimal grant funding coming into the country. In 2020, with COVID-19, additional constraints was placed in our economy. So our debt to GDP increased from 90 to 133%, which was very unsustainable. The fiscal space limit was very limited. The International Monetary Fund was already knocking on our doors since they wanted Belize to join the IMF system. But there was a new administration that had a couple of days into power, and they decided, you know what, we won't engage with the IMF. We will instead focus on a homegrown plan. And so they managed to do a blue bond transaction by using our marine resources. We managed to buy back our external debt. Our external debt was $553 million US. And when we did the blue bond transaction, we bought our debt at a 35% discount. So we managed to almost get our debt decreased from with that blue bond transaction from 553 to 365. And so when it came to our debt to GDP, it decreased by 12%. So from 133%, it decreased to 108%. At the moment, our debt to GDP is 63%, since other industries are performing good, the economy is performing good. But apart from that, after government officials attended the COP26 event, the government of Belize decided to establish the Climate Finance Unit to access as much climate finance as possible, and for the Climate Finance Unit to be that hub. How was it structured? Well, and the placement. Well, the climate finance unit was structured in a way that it's established in the Ministry of Economic Development. One of the reasons is that it's one of the two only ministries that focus on macroeconomics. So we work closely with the private sector, with academia, with the NGOs. And so that gave us the authority to work with different partners. And when we started the establishment of the climate finance unit in 2017, it was just one person, and that one person was me. At that time, from 2017 to 2022, I realized that there was so much opportunities to access some funding from the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and other funding agencies. So I started to push my chief executive officer to venture in establishing like a unit. And in 2022, it became a reality. So in 2022, it had a director, it had economists, like I was the economist, and we had a project development officer. So it was three. At the moment, the unit has grown to 13 persons. We have 3 project development officers, we have project managers, we have a communication officer, we have a monitoring evaluation officer to track the projects. And so the Green Climate Fund portfolio was the only one that we had responsibility. But since we did an excellent job with the Green Climate Fund, the Prime Minister gave us for us to be the focal point for the Adaptation Fund. And so at the moment, we have 9 funding entities that we are the national designated or focal point. And we are also the focal point for the European Union, the Global Fund. And also recently we joined the Inter-American Development Bank and Climate Change platform for finance and economy ministers. And so we're working closely with Central America and with South American countries, learning from them as much as possible. One of the main experience that we have managed to garner from this establishment of the Climate Finance Unit is that in just a few years, we have almost accessed 100 million US dollars. And one of the biggest project that we have access is it's a sugar project that I will be sharing in more details in a short while. But we have created 166 jobs as well. Jobs that are paying them, like the officers are receiving good salaries. And so we have seen that we're capitalizing and accessing funds from the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and other entities. And so we have garnered that respect, gained that respect from government, from our stakeholders locally and regionally and internationally. And so far, we have a huge buy-in from our political leaders. That political willingness is there. And so for us, it has been very easy, and we're just accessing as much finance as possible. Okay.
Thank you so much for that, Leroy. And I have a couple of follow-ups, but maybe I am gonna ask later because I would like to now turn to Claudia. So I'm gonna switch to Spanish now. So please change to the channel if you need the interpretation. Claudia, buenos días. En el caso de El Salvador cuenta con una mesa de financiamiento climático que es pues, un instrumento, un mecanismo de coordinación bastante interesante. Nos gustaría saber cuáles fueron los principales factores que impulsaron el desarrollo de esta mesa, cómo ha sido estructurada y también qué factores influyeron para, en este caso, no su ubicación dentro del gobierno, porque entendemos que hay muchas entidades de gobierno involucradas, pero para identificar estos socios o estas instituciones que iban a formar parte de la mesa, y si tienes alguna lección que compartir, te agradecería tu respuesta en 5 minutos. Gracias.
Gracias, Adrián. Buen día a todos. Gracias al panel y al NDC Partnership. Pues El Salvador en el 2021 elabora sus contribuciones nacionalmente determinadas. Fue un proceso que nos llevó un año, pero durante ese año, tras lograr definir cuáles eran nuestros compromisos, decíamos, ¿y ahora qué hacemos con este documento? O sea, ¿cómo se lleva a la práctica? Entonces pasamos a un proceso de planificación para la implementación de las NDC. Y fue precisamente en ese momento donde uno de los grandes hitos para El Salvador fue haber cuantificado esa NDC. Esa cuantificación nos daba un valor, o sea, nos decía, El Salvador necesita 1.050 millones de dólares, 1.050 millones de dólares para implementar su NDC. Y entonces, algo así como que el pánico empieza a correr en medio de las instituciones y los diferentes actores que tenemos responsabilidad en los compromisos climáticos, y esta demanda creciente de buscar en la NDC ese término de que nuestra NDC está condicionada a recibir el apoyo financiero para implementar las medidas. Ese fue como un parteaguas, saber cuánto necesitábamos y que además teníamos esa condición que en ese momento pues decíamos, qué bueno que la dejamos condicionar. Porque entonces nos abre la posibilidad de, ante esta situación, que fue el factor que determina que nos planteemos qué hacer para llegar a la implementación, entonces encontramos que era necesario contar con un espacio de alto nivel para coordinar acciones que nos llevaran a movilizar fondos para la acción climática. Ahí es donde se define una estructura, identificamos qué instituciones claves que tienen que ver con el mandato de hacer la política fiscal, de hacer la política económica y de hacer la política ambiental y climática que tuvieran liderazgo. Entonces, tenemos a un Ministerio de Hacienda que coordina un espacio que le llamamos Mesa de Financiamiento Climático, al Ministerio del Ambiente, al Ministerio de Economía, al Banco Central de Reserva de nuestro país, a la Secretaría de Comercio e Inversiones y a la Oficina de Cooperación de El Salvador, con la intención de que fueran estos actores que son estratégicos que nos ayuden a canalizar los recursos. Pues bien, en ese escenario, entonces se empieza a trabajar. Esto ya habíamos avanzado del 2021 al 2023. Se firma un acuerdo ejecutivo por parte del Ministerio de Hacienda y además estas instituciones firman una carta de entendimiento para iniciar los trabajos. A este momento, ya digamos 2 años después de tener una mesa, ¿qué lecciones tenemos ante esta necesidad de proveer, de movilizar fondos para la acción climática? Es definitivamente necesario que tengamos una formalidad que nos dé la cobertura para actuar. Es decir, este espacio de coordinación, al tener su acuerdo, su carta de entendimiento, eso le brinda mucha movilidad, mucha soltura al trabajo de las instituciones que trabajamos en el espacio. Pero también hemos aprendido que solo los niveles técnicos en una mesa de financiamiento climático son insuficientes. Necesitamos espacios o abrir o escalar el espacio del nivel ejecutivo, donde nuestros titulares puedan tomar decisiones y puedan impulsar las propuestas que estos espacios identifican, elaboran, llevan y propicien el hacer la política pública para la movilización de los recursos climáticos. Por ahí dejaría ahorita mi intervención, creo que casi estoy cerca de los 5 minutos. Quedo abierta a otras preguntas.
Gracias, muchas gracias, Claudia, por compartir estas experiencias y por ajustarte el tiempo. Continúo en español y ahora me gustaría darle la bienvenida a Mónica. Eh, Mónica trae una perspectiva desde el sector privado que también es muy interesante, muy relevante para esta discusión. Mónica, desde la perspectiva del sector privado, nos gustaría conocer cómo crees que las unidades de financiamiento climático pueden facilitar o mejorar la contribución del sector privado en la acción climática y que si nos puedes compartir alguna experiencia que tengas en la materia. Adelante.
Sí. Muchas gracias, Adrián. Es un gran honor estar estar aquí, compartir con todos. Yo quiero las perspectivas que les voy a compartir parten en realidad de primero un proceso bastante profundo de investigación, porque soy originaria de Nicaragua, vivo en Países Bajos, que es un país que invierte mucho en la adaptación. Y este tema de cómo financiar una transición justa hacia un modelo de desarrollo mucho más verde y regenerativo es algo que me ha apasionado, ¿no? En el tiempo. Entonces, en el 2021 publiqué un informe llamado Apalancando la inversión privada en la adaptación, el papel evolutivo de la financiación climática para facilitar ese cambio de paradigma durante la Semana de Acción Climática en Londres. Y en ese informe analizaba, ¿no?, exhaustivamente los flujos climáticos internacionales y la inversión en adaptación entre el 2010 y el 2020, viendo las carteras de inversión de los principales fondos como el Fondo Climático Verde, el Fondo de Adaptación y los CIF, gestionado por el Banco Mundial, pero también el papel de la banca multilateral y los esquemas de financiamiento emergentes y las asociaciones público-privadas. Entonces, pero desde ese momento, de alguna manera, me he ido moviendo de rol y más hacia el sector privado. Solía trabajar en el Instituto Holandés de Gestión de Recursos Hídricos, haciendo consultoría especializada también en asociaciones público-privadas, pero empecé a ver que era necesario hacer las innovaciones desde el sector financiero, ¿cierto? Y con los que financian los proyectos. Entonces, empecé a trabajar directamente con la banca multilateral y las inversionistas de impacto, y eso es la perspectiva, ¿no?, que les voy a mostrar, porque a través de ese proceso de implementar, si se quiere, algunas de esas ideas, fui corroborando que hay dos barreras sistémicas para la participación del sector privado, y quiero empezar por esas porque después nos vamos a mover, ¿verdad?, como a cómo las unidades de financiación climática pueden de alguna manera ayudarnos a remover esas barreras, ¿no? Una son los altos costos de transacción, y que son esos, pues son todos esos costos necesarios para hacer posible una inversión, ¿cierto? Tanto pública como privada tiene que tener un caso de negocios completo. Y si un sector privado quiere invertir en medidas de mitigación de riesgos climáticos, que muchos pasan a través del ciclo del agua, por ejemplo, entonces tiene que ser a nivel de cuencas hidrográficas o de toda una bioregión, se debe comenzar recopilando. Mi experiencia es que si uno empieza recopilando el montón de informes y planes que algunas veces quedan a nivel de ideas, ¿no?, que se han hecho en diferentes sectores, organizando, casi que toca, hay veces, organizar a todos los actores públicos y privados que tienen una influencia en esa cuenca, revisando todas las herramientas existentes para evaluar la efectividad de las medidas. Y ahí me he encontrado, porque fui directora de cambio de impacto climático de un inversionista especializado en resiliencia de agua, que resulta que muchas de las herramientas que existen están hechas para gobiernos, para planificar, pero muy pocas al nivel de granularidad necesario para un inversionista evaluar, ¿no? Sí, cuáles son tus impactos en resiliencia. Entonces, y en todo ese proceso, digamos, hay que, pues, si uno quiere invertir en ese tipo de medidas, sobre todo adaptación, que es aún más duro que de mitigación, hay que invertir en estudios de viabilidad más detallados y en todos los pasos involucrados en preparar esos proyectos de inversión. Porque en este momento, desafortunadamente, aunque hay más y más fondos de inversión que se interesan en estos temas, es como que la cartera de proyectos de inversión no está lista, ¿no? En muchos países. Y entonces eso requiere tanto de esfuerzos y experiencia especializada desde el sector privado, que muchas empresas deciden detenerse a mitad de camino. La otra barrera sistémica que hay es los riesgos de transición, porque muchas de las soluciones que necesitamos para ser efectivos serán innovadoras, ¿verdad? Como soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, como inversiones multipropósitos, para las cuales algunas veces no hay datos históricos de su rendimiento, no tenemos toda una cadena de proveedores de servicios que nos pueda hacer esa inversión menos riesgosa que, por ejemplo, con la infraestructura tradicional. Y además, para su implementación, muchas de estas innovaciones, por ejemplo, la economía circular en temas de agua, etcétera, requieren de regulaciones consistentes y como un enforcement, una aplicación por parte del gobierno, para que se convierta en un mercado. Entonces, esto eleva los riesgos. Luego, también, cuando vamos a hacer el due diligence, o como la revisión de esas inversiones, muchos de estos proyectos digamos, dependen mucho del contexto, lo cual hace ese proceso de due diligence bastante costoso. En general, y ya sé que se me está acabando el tiempo, quiero decir que estas dos barreras, a pesar de estas dos barreras, hay muchas empresas para las cuales su licencia de operar social depende mucho de la adaptación, por ejemplo, el riesgo de escasez de agua, que están invirtiendo esos esfuerzos, ¿no? Y que necesitan de ese ambiente habilitante y espero que más adelante podamos profundizar en esos bloques del ambiente habilitante.
Gracias, muchas gracias, Mónica. Ahora voy a cambiar a inglés. I'm switching to English to talk to Marco. Marco, welcome. We would like to know from the perspective of the Inter-American Development Bank, what characteristics you think make climate finance units more effective in securing and mobilizing climate finance, and what role can play or is playing the IDB in supporting this type of platforms at the country level?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me today at this conversation. It's very interesting. I read your policy note, also very interesting. I advise the participants to have a look at it. It's well written and has lots of interesting considerations. So, when you ask me about the characteristics of a finance unit, climate finance unit that helps an MDB to work with it, many of the things are things that people can also find in your policy note, and it seems to me, I will highlight a couple here, but an important one is good governance, a clear role for the climate unit, and not just in terms of what's on paper, but really in practice how well this function is performed in terms of linking, coordinating, leading, whatever the role may be, different parts of the government, the Ministry of Finance especially, but also other ministries. I think this ability to really link the external funders and the Ministry of Finance, the implementing ministries, being able to provide incentives to private sector are critical and are kind of complicated and new to some extent when applied to the climate area. So I think this is sort of one of the key areas where we see relevance. And obviously to do it, you need a good organizations, good tools, and also internal capacity to be able to do all these things that are a bit complicated. So in terms of how organizations and Bs can help, to some extent we're lucky that we can provide technical assistance to countries, and so we can help structure these units and fit them in the context where they're in. We can provide assistance to set them up, basically to start them, and also in time to strengthen and over time they become a partner, a collaborator. So it's in all these phases, an MDB can be useful for a country in terms of working together. To make it sustainable over time, some of the issues once you mentioned, a good a law regulation or good grounding for the unit obviously helps, because you're not vulnerable to changes in the political winds, so to speak, and also being able to have a funding source, a budget line that is secured is important. To some extent, the success of a unit makes it easier to get budget. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. So I think it's important at the beginning to do things right, so that then you can get the credibility to be able to then justify the existence of the unit and this function in the country and in the budget. I would also like to mention one thing that was mentioned by a colleague. You asked about how we, like IDB or MDBs, can help, but I think there is a lot of value in collaboration between countries. You know, all countries have very interesting experience that they can share and they can learn from each other. You know, we see it in the platform for Ministries of Finance for Climate Action, where we have the honor to be the secretary for it, and we see that through the conversations that the countries have and to the discussions they have about all the problems and the opportunities and how to solve them. There's a lot of learning going on, and we feel it's very, very useful for the countries involved. So I think this is also an area that it's important in my view to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, for sharing these insights and the experience of the IDV. Definitely very interesting, the work that the regional platform is doing, supporting countries, you know, setting up governance or institutional arrangements for climate finance mobilization. Moving to the second round of questions. In this round, speakers, panelists will have 4 minutes to respond to the question, so 1 minute less. So I appreciate if you can stick to the time. And first question is for Claudia from El Salvador. So again, switching to Spanish. Claudia, en la experiencia de El Salvador, ¿qué herramientas o estrategias han utilizado para movilizar financiamiento del sector privado o para involucrar al sector privado? Y en la experiencia de El Salvador, ¿cuáles han sido tal vez algunas barreras que han impedido un involucramiento efectivo del sector privado?
Gracias, Adrián. Bueno, partamos que para nosotros es fundamental tener conciencia que no estamos solos en la sociedad, o sea, como gobierno, y que en la acción climática hay oportunidades para que se actúen desde diferentes ámbitos. Entonces, ahí es donde vemos que uno de los actores que tienen más potencial de actuar es el sector privado. Y esto por la sencilla razón que estos actores, sean productores, empresas, individuos en general, tienen el recurso económico para efectuar innovaciones, modificaciones, etcétera, en función de la adaptación y la mitigación. Por supuesto, esto va de la mano porque la experiencia que hemos tenido como país por la ubicación en la que estamos, los eventos climáticos, como bien decía Belice antes, son más frecuentes, más intensos y nos afectan. Entonces las cadenas productivas se interrumpen, carreteras por las que no se pueden circular, pérdidas económicas y humanas, etc. Por tanto, esa misma realidad es la que ha permitido que en nuestro país el sector privado haya avanzado mucho recientemente en aspectos como eficiencia energética, agroindustria, circularidad, gestión de residuos, salvaguardas ambientales también. Y esto está siendo impulsado por diferentes factores. Una de las herramientas que nosotros estamos como potenciando es el rol de la Banca de Desarrollo Nacional, que puede canalizar líneas de crédito, sea de primero o segundo piso, orientados a estos temas que mencionaba, energías renovables, eficiencia energética, modificación de cadenas productivas, especialmente en agroindustria y caficultura. También líneas de segundo piso para productividad de micros y pequeñas empresas, productos financieros que llevan estos enfoques de mitigación y adaptación al cambio climático. Por ejemplo, el Fondo Salvadoreño de Garantías, bajo el programa de innovación, se ha permitido habilitar líneas de garantía para desarrollo tecnológico, generación de energías renovables, también reconversión ambiental, que le dan como el soporte a la apertura de estas líneas de crédito. También, como un esfuerzo desde la parte nacional, la banca nacional, nosotros tenemos 3 bancos nacionales de primer piso, junto con el Ministerio del Ambiente, hemos establecido un protocolo verde del sistema financiero. Aquí concurren los bancos y analizamos las prioridades en temas ambientales, climáticos, en general sostenibles, y se discuten qué propuestas de productos financieros verdes pueden canalizarse. La intención es tener el mayor alcance y el mayor impacto, o sea, salir al mercado y ofrecer al sector privado diferentes líneas de créditos para líneas específicas que son apuestas de país. Eso nos permite potencializar el uso del dinero. Sí hay barreras, aparte de las condiciones de las dinámicas de mercado, lo que el COVID ha causado a nivel global, las recientes regulaciones también que se imponen por sectores que comercian con otros países. Por ejemplo, el tema de café para nosotros es importante. Entonces, ahí sí vemos barreras importantes que todavía el sector privado está enfrentando. Una que es real es los limitados recursos que están etiquetados para la acción climática, que sean disponibles en nuestro país para que las empresas o los productores accedan a esos recursos en esas condiciones preferenciales, con tasas de interés disminuidas o plazos extendidos, o incluso mecanismos de incentivo como retornos, por ejemplo, para inversión, etcétera. Eso todavía es limitado. Y otra manifestación que el sector privado constantemente nos hace saber es que es necesario equilibrar, conciliar esta relación entre incentivos e impuestos. La parte fiscal no la podemos evitar, pero también existe la demanda de incentivos. Entonces, ¿cómo lograr ese equilibrio para que el sector privado acceda o se entusiasme en hacer modificaciones sustantivas que le lleven a la adaptación y en algunos casos incluso a contribuir a la mitigación, pero con esa relación ganar-ganar? Así que sí necesitamos todavía integrar estas necesidades de desarrollo y reconversión tecnológica en el sector privado con los compromisos climáticos y la movilización de financiamiento en términos generales en nuestro país.
Muchas gracias, Claudia. Now turning to Belize, to Leroy Martinez. In Belize perspective, what tools and strategies have you used to mobilize private sector investments or financing? And based on your experience, what have been the main barriers that have limited private sector investments? Over to you, Leroy.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So Belize is a country that has managed to develop very ambitious but realistic strategies. We have such as the national determined contribution. We have a climate finance strategy that was also developed on how we can access as much climate finance during the next 5 years. We also managed to develop our own medium-term development strategy. One of the 6 goals, it's goal number 5, is to protect the environment and natural resources. Belize it's a small country, but we're very wealthy when it comes to natural resources. But without private sector, it's impossible for a country to meet their climate change goals. In Belize, majority of the micro businesses are fall into the micro to let's see the medium size, and a few large enterprises we have, and most of them are focused in the agriculture sector. Also in Belize, we have major industries such as the banana, citrus, and the sugar that are the main contributors to the national economy by creating that foreign exchange and generating employment as well. However, all of these are privately owned by individuals, and they also experience challenges in depth, challenges with accessing climate finance and climate change impacts. And however, as a government, this is where you have to support your private sector as much as possible, since they have a lot of challenges. And so a few years ago, we started to work closely with the sugar industry, whereby we developed a concept note, we submitted it to the Green Commit Fund. The total amount is 37 million US dollars. And so we managed to get the approval from the Green Commit Fund board, whereby they approve out of the 39 million US, they approved 25 million grant as grant for Belize as one of the co-financing. And so when you convert the 25 US million, it's 50 million Belize dollars. So grant funding, no commitment from the GCF. So that was a perfect example whereby like a government can work closely with the private sector. In addition, this project will benefit 4 farmer associations. Almost 5,000 farmers will benefit directly, and the mill as well. And so by working together, you can surely reap the benefits. Another important thing that we are doing is that we're working closely with IDB, with the Caribbean Development Bank, with World Bank, and we're telling them we want loans, but it has to be highly concessionary. We want at least 1 to 3%, nothing above that. If you want to give us loans from 6, 7, 8, or 9, you can stay with it. That's the directive that we received from our Minister of Finance. And so what we are doing is that we are pressuring these entities for them to seek to provide us with blending funding. So they can seek funding from the South Koreans, from Taiwan, from other countries, blend it with their own resources, and then we can receive those highly concessionary loans along with grants. Nonetheless, accessing adaptation funding is becoming much more difficult. Funding agencies like the Green Climate Fund and others like the JEF, they don't want to give you too much adaptation fund, especially if you're from private sector and you will get a return on investment. They prefer to give you loans. We're, like I said, in Belize, we're open to loans, but it has to be highly concessionary. We have some examples of some of them whereby we have access some loans at 0.0001% interest rate. And that's something that the country can consider like going forward. But at the end of the day, it's to make sure that we get as much grant as possible to support our private sector.
Thank you so much for that, Leroy. Now turn to Marco from the IDB. Marco, what role can, in this case, the IDB, but also financial institutions play in supporting climate finance units to mobilize climate financing, especially from the private sector?
Okay. Okay. So maybe I'll step back a little bit, maybe to start answering it. So I guess the first question is, what is it that would attract private sector in? What is it makes a country a good country to invest in? So from the point of view of an investor, you want basic credibility in the country and long-term stability to some extent. I mean, those are probably 2 important elements that one could consider. So then maybe one can ask, okay, how can a climate finance unit help with that, and how can an MDB help a climate finance unit do it? So it seems to me that many of the things that, for example, your paper as well mentioned in terms of what the climate unit can do are relevant here in terms of being able to develop good strategies and plans, both on the climate side, but also linked with a development of the country. At the end, the goal is good development, and the environment is a factor in it. So it has to be integrated, and these plans should be really defined in terms of needed investment and linked with the investment system, public investment system that the country has, but also ability to create mechanisms to incentivize private sector to provide the right incentives through taxes or through the right services that the government can give. So I think all these things are part of what the climate finance unit can is doing, and if done well, they provide a signal to investors that the country is on the ball, basically, it can deliver. And I think through technical cooperations and assistance, MD can help NBs can help with all these activities, which in fact we're doing. Part of it is also helping with creating a government that institutionally is strong and there's transparency in there is rule of law and all these things that are basic, but they're very important. So to some extent, you need to start from there, and then you can also create this element that focuses on climate and sustainability that sits on top on it. In addition, I think obviously the NIDB can also help on specific, programs or projects. And here, I mean, we mentioned some. We are partners with countries in terms of leveraging climate finance funds. We help develop green bonds, blue bonds to bring in money from capital markets. We have our own products as usual, but obviously we know that there is only so much we can do with our loans. We're trying to innovate. For example, we were recently launched and we're working on BitClima, which is a new product we're trying to offer to the clients, the countries that link climate performance with a reduction fundamentally in the terms of the loans. So there are different things that IDBs can do, both on the technical side and on the direct investment side, so to speak, in terms of being partnered to a country. And obviously, maybe the advantages of NDB has are that we can provide all this mix of tools, and we also can work at different levels with government, with private sectors. And our organization, for example, has a venture capital unit, there's money into the private sector unit. So we have different elements that we can also bring in to work together. But obviously, we don't have all the answers. So we do also need to learn and cooperate with the countries to understand what they need, and so that we can also refine our offer based on what is the really demand that we listen to, and we try always to respond at the end to the demand of our countries when we provide this sort of support. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And now turning to the private sector perspective. So switching back to Spanish to Mónica. Mónica, ¿cómo pueden las unidades de financiamiento climático desempeñar un papel más proactivo en la reducción de riesgos para la inversión climática o la creación de entornos más favorables? Tal vez conectando un poco con lo que venías comentando en la primera pregunta. ¿Y cómo crees que las unidades de financiamiento climático podrían colaborar de manera directa con el sector privado?
Sí, muchísimas gracias. Bueno, yo creo que tal y como el artículo, ¿no? La nota conceptual que nos han presentado dice que las unidades de financiamiento climático tienen un rol crucial, ¿no? Que pueden tener en la eliminación de estas barreras sistémicas. Y la facilitación de cambios profundos, yo creo, en el Sistema Nacional de Planificación de Inversiones, ¿no? Cómo se justifica cada una de esas inversiones, incluso en los temas de adquisición pública. Y pueden fortalecer los diferentes aspectos o pilares del ambiente habilitante, que yo creo que hay como tres aspectos o bloques muy importantes, ¿no? El componente técnico, como la disponibilidad de datos, información para la toma de decisiones, planificación y estructuración de los casos de negocio, tanto desde el punto de vista público como desde el punto de vista privado. Voy a ir un poquito más a profundidad en eso en un momento. El componente institucional, que no es solo el entorno de regulaciones, cierto, macro, sino también la calidad de las estructuras de gobernanza, más como, digamos, como a nivel de cuenca o de paisajes y para ciertas actividades de adaptación es necesario, que permitan la participación efectiva del sector privado y inversiones colectivas, porque mucho de eso requiere de ese tipo de inversiones más allá, digamos, de lo que un sector privado puede hacer dentro de su planta, ¿no? El componente financiero, la provisión de instrumentos y plataformas de financiamiento que faciliten el acceso a capital, creo que ya los colegas de Belice, etcétera, han hablado mucho de eso, y que reduzcan también y mitiguen los riesgos de transición que decía, ¿no? Como garantía, cierto tipo de esos elementos. Ahora, en el análisis que les hablaba, que publiqué en el 2021, vemos que los fondos climáticos y hasta cierto punto la banca multilateral ha hecho mucho los aspectos técnicos y financieros, pero de alguna manera ese fortalecimiento e incluso innovación en términos de estructuras de gobernanza para inversiones colectivas a nivel de cuenca o bioregión, etcétera, ahí hay bastante como por hacer. Y ahí es donde yo espero que de alguna manera, o sea, mi petición es que sabiendo dónde están los eslabones que nos faltan, ¿cierto? Para lidiar con esas barreras, aprovechar, o sea, creo que la unidad de financiamiento climático puede ser crucial en articular el ecosistema de inversión nacional y también aprovechar la experiencia y la perspectiva del sector privado de una forma transparente y bien facilitada. Y algunas de las cosas muy específicas, y lo digo sobre todo desde el punto de vista de, por ejemplo, inversión en seguridad hídrica, donde hay todo un tema ideológico también, creo que es muy importante influir en las prácticas de adquisición pública para facilitar la participación del sector privado local, también de la pequeña y mediana empresa, para que vayan entendiendo estas inversiones y su percepción de riesgo vaya bajando, ¿no? Entonces, si usted tiene un proveedor de servicio en temas de adaptación, luego él se puede volver un inversionista, pero no podemos pensar que eso va a pasar de forma directa casi, ¿no? Lo otro es desmitificar la participación del sector privado en sectores como el agua y la seguridad hídrica, desarrollando capacidades en gobiernos nacionales y locales para estructurar carteras de inversión. Carteras de inversión también de tipo multipropósito, porque algunas de estas inversiones, si no se combinan las funciones, no van a ser rentables, pero que de alguna manera puedan aplicar lo que llamamos como una ingeniería de incentivos, que deje de ser algo ideológico y que sea algo simplemente ingeniería. Y sobre todo también fomentar espacios para la colaboración público-privada temprana. Y eso digo no solo a nivel de proyectos, sino planes. Yo creo que podríamos llegar a ideas más importantes, más innovadoras a cerrar la brecha si involucramos al sector privado y su creatividad, ¿verdad? Y ya para finalizar, promover esfuerzos precompetitivos, porque hay muchas empresas que quieren empezar a tomar paso, pero que a escala, o sea, individual no lo van a poder hacer. Entonces, articular, tal vez como decía Leroy, no sé, en el sector de azúcar se articularon a todos los productores, de tal manera que en conjunto puedan hacer esas inversiones. Y lo siento, pero de verdad que también proveer herramientas y datos al nivel que se necesita para validar una inversión desde el punto de vista privado, que ahora mismo lo que tenemos no nos permite hacer ese caso de inversión. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Mónica. We are entering the last round of questions for the panelists, and we are a little bit behind the time. So kindly ask you to respond in 1-2 minute max, just a quick reflection. I'm going to ask first to the English speaking panelist, and I would like to start with Marco. And Leroy, the same question will be formulated to you. So how do you envision the evolution of climate finance units or similar institutional arrangements such as climate finance boards in El Salvador in the coming years in response to emerging trends in climate financing? Marco, over to you.
Well, I think that what we see today sort of will continue to some extent. Obviously these units are still kind of new to some extent. They're not really mature. So I think there will be still a process of getting a bit more mature. And I think probably the area that could be more important for them to do right is this idea to be able to coordinate well and orchestrate well with different parts of the government to be able to really plug in the climate challenges into the broad development goals of a country. So yeah, this is what I see as the main challenge, so to speak, for the coming months. But papers like yours are really useful because they help structure a bit also in terms of what to do and how to do it over time. So thank you again for publishing it.
Thank you so much, Marco. Leroy, over to you.
Yeah, Agent, can you repeat the question? Okay.
Sure. How do you envision the evolution of the role of climate finance units? In this case, you can refer to the case of Belize in the coming years in response to emerging trends in climate financing. So where do you see the climate finance unit evolving to?
Sure, thank you very much. So the CFU has gained that respect. We have that we report directly to the Minister of Finance and to Cabinet, the Prime Minister. He always goes and visit our unit. It's one that they really support a lot. And so we have gained that support from them. In addition, we are seeking the Green Climate Fund accreditation. We want to seek that accreditation of 50 million US dollars. And so we have managed to strengthen our fiduciary standards like procurement, project management. And recently we submitted a financial management capacity assessment that was successfully approved by the Green Climate Fund. So now we're accessing readiness funding directly from them. We are developing the projects, we're implementing them. Like I said before, we were 3 persons, we're 13 now. Each person in the unit has a responsibility for 1 or 2 funding agencies. Like one of them is the focal point for the GCF Adaptation Fund. They're the ones who engage directly and try to develop that portfolio as much as possible. In addition, the unit is now working to become a department. Yes, we're fine with a unit, but our next goal is to become a department. And so in a few weeks, the Green Climate Fund is about to approve $1 million US for our ministry. And so our unit will be the one who will be implementing that project. And so one of the steps is that we will be transitioning to becoming a department. But we just don't want to become a department because we have to think about sustainability. And this is whereby like with that same funding that we will receive, we will try to start developing or doing the necessary studies to develop a climate finance fund. So we could have that fund and then a department as well. In addition, we have a very big pipeline of projects. It's valued at almost 300 million US dollars. And one of them, like what the colleague from IDB said, that they have this IDB Klima. Belize is one of the countries that is a pilot member of that program. And so we're working with IDB to access almost US $22 million in a waste water project, whereby if you overperform, you can get a reward of a percentage from that same loan. The loan would be highly concessionary as well. So to conclude, like I urge the different partners, the different countries, the government entities to invest in a climate finance unit. We have seen the benefit. There's one already established. You don't have to reinvent this one. You can just capitalize and learn from those lessons. When it came to the officers, we have it mixed. Some of them are public servants, and some of them were hired in contractual basis, 2 to 3 years with funding from the Green Climate Fund through the Readiness and through other partners. And so once they come in as a contract officer, what we are doing now is that we have built their capacity, so now we want to make them a public servant personnel. But so far, it's an important initiative to invest in them.
Thank you so much for that, Leroy. Now switching to Spanish, and I would like to start with Claudia. Claudia, ¿cómo visualiza la evolución de la mesa de financiamiento climático en los próximos años y qué crees que se puede hacer para fortalecer? Te agradecería tu respuesta en 1 minuto, una respuesta breve. Gracias.
Justo. Bueno, en los próximos años, para El Salvador seguirá siendo un tema prioritario el financiamiento climático. Por eso es que estamos trabajando por lograr la institucionalización del tema de financiamiento climático. Hemos comenzado ya con la mesa, como lo compartía previamente. Tenemos una estrategia de financiamiento climático que es de doble dividendo. Esta estrategia nos está orientando cómo vamos a lograr movilizar los fondos, pero que además que nos va a permitir lograr estos objetivos climáticos, también nos abre la puerta para desarrollarnos como país. Esa es una ambición que nosotros entendemos que sí es posible, o sea, que hagamos la transformación de adaptación, contribuyamos a la mitigación, pero al mismo tiempo nos permita desarrollarnos como país. Pero también entendemos que eso no se hace, no es trabajo de una sola persona, incluso no es de una sola institución. Vean en la mesa, habemos 6 instituciones y todavía hemos encontrado barreras, algunas limitaciones. Tenemos que definir todavía instrumentos y mecanismos de financiamiento, tener nuestra cartera de proyectos priorizados, entre otras cosas. Para ello necesitamos una estructura que esté dedicada a gestionar todo lo que implica proveer los fondos para implementar la acción climática. Por eso es que en el corto plazo nosotros sí visualizamos avanzar hacia fortalecer la institucionalidad. Para fortalecer el escenario en el cual se provean estos fondos, necesitamos interactuar de manera cercana gobierno y sector privado. Eso nos va a permitir tener una integración clara de cuáles son las necesidades que tiene el sector privado para reconvertir o enfrentar los impactos del cambio climático, pero también surgen de ellos mismos las soluciones. Entonces es necesario acordar qué acciones van a ser de impacto, que sí sean factibles, que sean bancables. Y en este mismo proceso, pues también vemos el rol de los socios para el desarrollo, que están brindando un soporte y nos habiliten capacidades. Ese es como el trazo del corto plazo.
Gracias. Muchas gracias, Claudia. Y Mónica, ya para cerrar esta tercera ronda y este panel, me gustaría conocer tus reflexiones finales sobre dónde ves este tipo de las unidades de financiamiento climático y el relacionamiento con el sector privado en los próximos años. Gracias.
Gracias. Bueno, yo creo que como también decía Claudia, yo creo que al final la esperanza es que las unidades nacionales de financiamiento climático se conviertan en facilitadores del ecosistema de inversión, ¿cierto? Garantizando no solo que los fondos estén disponibles, sino que se ocupen de una forma estratégica para generar ese cambio de paradigma en el modelo de crecimiento, ¿no? Combinando experiencia técnica, innovación financiera y asociaciones o alianzas estratégicas. Más específicamente, yo creo que lo que es necesario, y me gustó mucho escuchar el caso de Belice, es que ellos pueden ser los facilitadores claves en la creación de narrativas y planes de acción pragmáticos para la transición, ¿cierto? Promoviendo un enfoque de portafolio, porque aunque queramos ir, como decía Claudia, mañana a la economía regenerativa, tenemos que crear puentes concretos entre los objetivos globales de clima, biodiversidad y desertificación, por ejemplo, con las necesidades locales de las comunidades en este momento, coordinar inversiones a diferentes escalas temporales, asegurando fondos concesionales e inversiones de impacto para proyectos de largo plazo, pero al mismo tiempo reconociendo el rol clave de los sectores productivos que están en este momento activos, ¿cierto? Como la agroindustria u otros, porque al final, si vamos muy rápido y no generamos los empleos y el movimiento económico necesario, podemos, digamos, como tener grandes crisis sociales. Y en general, yo creo que avanzando hacia una planificación más de misiones, ¿no? Y enfocándonos en esa visión regenerativa, del desarrollo. De verdad que creo que pueden jugar un rol crucial porque precisamente si ellos van a tener como la zanahoria de la financiación, son los que pueden crear los incentivos claves para que empecemos a trabajar juntos los que ahora no trabajamos. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Mónica, and thank you to all of the panelists. We are running out of time. Fortunately, we have very insightful contributions, but in sacrifice of the Q&A. So we're committed to responding to your questions, to the questions that were formulated in the Q&A box. But now I would like to, well, first, thank you, Monica, Claudia, Marco, and Leroy for your contributions. And I would like to turn now to close this webinar to Mr. Toby Roycroft. He's the Deputy Team Leader at the Access to Finance team at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of FCDO for closing remarks. Toby, over to you.
Thank you, Adrian, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. It's my pleasure to join you all today. As mentioned, I work in our Climate and Nature Finance Department within the UK Government's Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. And as was mentioned at the outset, we're very, very pleased to support this good work through the NDC partnership to further the aims and objectives of the task force on access to climate finance, through which there's been a huge amount of interest, appetite, and good work on establishing climate finance units, which we're excited to kind of propagate and share with the wider audience. As we conclude today, I'd just like to try my best to recap a few points. Before I do so, I just want to extend my thanks to the excellent panelists and the excellent contributions from attendees as well. I would also flag that I was pleased to join the session that occurred this morning, my time, which serves as a really useful companion piece to this discussion. So I would urge attendees to catch up on that when the recording is shared. It offers maybe a reflection on some climate finance units in the kind of the earlier stages of their establishment, which would be useful for many to hear. But today I kind of captured three core threads. I think we started by hearing about, in establishing a climate finance unit, the importance of political buy-in and institutional stability. And we heard from El Salvador about the importance of the National Climate Finance Strategy in providing such institutional framework for climate finance, guiding its effective management and mobilization. Secondly, we heard about the importance of good CFUs providing good governance, policies and frameworks that play an important role in incentivizing private sector investment. We heard from Belize the role the Climate Finance Unit has played there in mobilizing and coordinating climate finance and translating that into a range of adaptation and resilience projects. Thirdly, we spoke about the incentives needed to attract private sector investment and the importance of partnerships with the private sector. Noting that when we talk about climate finance, there's a hugely important role for the public climate finance architecture to play, but the far greater quantums are available through the private sector. So we need to tap into those. We heard from Aldmira about fostering public-private partnerships and developing innovative solutions for a range of climate and sustainable environment projects there. So hopefully that kind of does a reasonable job to summarize. I will kind of thank everyone for their participation. Let's continue to share experience, work together, regroup as we all kind of embark on this journey together. Thanks again, and I'll draw the session to a close.